Full Moon Academy by Roy Malcolm. Published by Life Books. Narrated by Randall Schaefer. Chapter 2. Serial. Present Day. It was always a foreboding sign when there were so many police cars parked in one place, and an even worse sign when all of the officers gathered had expressions of concern on their faces and were standing around yellow tape. The call had come in at about 7 that morning. A group of hikers had been on their usual morning routine when they'd come across the body, one that had been impossibly drained of blood and was paler than anything Police Chief Ange Park had ever seen prior to that week. But in that week alone, this victim was the 7th in as many days. The 7th in a string of bodies that had been found in the Janus forest, drained entirely of blood. Like the preceding 6 times, there were no markers or hair traces around that provided any clue as to what was responsible for the attacks. But as chief, it was Ange's responsibility to give people an explanation. And when he himself didn't have any explanation for what was going on, it meant he had to lie and cook one up. The past 6 bodies had all been labeled as victims of animal attacks, and the 7th would be no different. Once he'd instructed the other officers how they'd explain this to people, he crouched beneath the yellow tape so he could get one more look at the victim before the body was bagged and prepped for transfer to the coroners. The victim was a 26-year-old male they'd now ID'd as Eric Parker. The victim's eyes were frozen wide open in fear, which was how they'd found him. Nothing about him really stood out. He had short dark hair, thin eyebrows, and a small goatee. His records showed that he'd been captain of the football team during his time at Wilmoon High, but that was as high as he'd ever flown. He hadn't gotten into college, and he'd spent the past few years operating a comic book store on Salvatore Street. Victim's parents are dead, Ange murmured to himself. Died when he was a child. Lived with a grandparent for a few years, but grandparent's out of the picture now too. No criminal record. For all intents and purposes, he's what you could call a ghost, just like the previous 6 victims. Hey, Chief, you okay? Ange glanced over his shoulder at the officer who'd addressed him. Blonde and young, with eyes not yet drained of life or joy. Clearly a new addition to the force. Ange read the officer's name off his tag. I'm fine, Officer Davies. Just examining the body one last time, taking a few mental notes. You think we should organize a manhunt to find the animal behind these bodies? Davies asked, resting his hands on his waist. We should contain this before whatever's doing this gets bored of the forest and starts operating in town. I know, Ange sighed. Just give me a moment, okay? Right, sorry. Ange turned his attention back to the victim, staring at him grimly. He examined the punctures on the side of the neck, punctures that looked a lot like they'd been done by fangs. They weren't the only punctures the victim had. There were identical marks on his chest and both his hands. This had either been done by a rather gluttonous animal or by multiple animals. Ange rose to his feet, shaking his head in disappointment that no new clues had presented themselves to him. All he'd noticed now was stuff he'd noticed when he first arrived on the scene. He crossed over the yellow tape once more and headed toward 2 of his detectives, Rhonda White and Mark Jacobson. Chief, the both of them greeted. White, Jacobson, Ange nodded at them. You think we might get lucky and this'll be the last one? Jacobson asked, although the pessimistic expression on his face revealed that he expected things to get a little worse. I hope so, Ange sighed. Look, I want the both of you to see if you can find any relations the victim had. No family in town, Chief. Not just family, Ange responded. I'm talking friends or even enemies, acquaintances, anything really. I'd recommend starting with his store. There's got to be someone who must have known him, someone who would know why he came to the forest, what time he came here, and who he came here with. You think he had company? Rhonda queried. I don't think anyone with their right mind would stride into this forest all on their lonesome, Ange answered. I'm going to have a warning sent out to everyone in town, instructing them to stay away from the forest until we figured this whole thing out and stopped whatever animals leaving these bodies. 7 in 7 days, Jacobson shuddered. It's an unusual pattern for any animal. There's some very unusual animals out there, Ange commented, and pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He unlocked it with a swipe and started to dial a number. Who are you calling? Rhonda asked. An old friend, Ange answered as he hit the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. He's got a certain eye and sense for things like this, a bit of an expert. Think of him as somewhat of an independent contractor. Is it wise to involve someone outside the force? It'd be foolish not to involve this person, Ange responded. The two of you go get started with your assignment. Let me know if you find any leads. Yes, sir, the two of them said in unison and started to walk away. A second later, the phone was answered with a click, and a firm voice came through from the other end of the line. Hello, Chief. It is Chief now, isn't it? I'm pretty sure it was Captain the last time we spoke. Yes, it's Chief now, Ange answered. Promotion was inevitable considering how quickly the previous chiefs were dying on the job. Is that why you're calling? The voice asked. Are you dying? No, Jesus, no. Ange chuckled lightly, then turned stern again after a few seconds. But people are dying, Ari. 7 people in 7 days, all in the Janus forest. And the bodies. There's something weird going on there. They'd all been drained of their blood. There was silence on the call. I take it that the silence means it ain't one of yours doing this? Ange asked. Are there claw marks? Ari asked, his tone grim now. Ange shook his head. No claw marks. Just really tidy puncture holes. Maybe your sort are learning not to scratch their food? Aha, good joke. Ari sounded annoyed, not amused. Where are you now, Ange? I'm still in the forest. And the body? It's here too, but there's still officers around. I don't think you should come here, Ange replied. Well, I need to see it. I know, Ange sighed. The victim's going to get transferred to the coroner's in a few. I've got friends at the coroner's office. I'll buy us enough time for you to see the victim yourself. Thank you. Ari, Ange began, and looked around warily before lowering his voice. If it isn't one of yours, do you know what could be doing this? Because 7 in 7 days is scary, and I'm not sure how much longer people will keep buying the animal attack thing, especially if this spills over into town. If it's what I think it is, it's definitely going to spill over into town, Ari said gravely. I'm a bit occupied right now, but I'll meet you at the coroner's later. We'll talk then. All right, see you later, Ange said. He ended the call, slipped his phone back into his pocket, and stared at the victim's body from a distance, watching as the body was bagged with his hands resting on his waist, a grim expression on his face. God help us, Uncle. Tall Victorian-style buildings rose upwards in any direction the eye could look. The buildings constructed in a way that they formed a circle, with a massive grass field right in the center. Tall as the buildings were, there were people perched on the roofs and sitting by windowsills carefreely. There were even more people out in the massive field, since that was where all the lessons at Full Moon Academy took place. People out on the field were constantly running at each other and exchanging fierce blows, transforming into massive, bounding wolves and back into regular people in the middle of combat. Standing under some shade and barking instructions at all the young shapeshifters was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose biceps bulged in the white tee he had on. He had short gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard, with crystal blue eyes currently trained on the one person he'd been observing for the past hour. Ari Whitefang winced as a powerful blow connected with the main student of interest, and he shook his head in disappointment as the boy went sailing through the air, crashing headfirst into a group of other werewolves who'd been focused on their training. "Hey, watch it!" Pike Dunson snarled and bared his fangs at Aiden Morrigan, his eyes glowing a furious red. "Sorry," Aiden muttered, rubbing his head as he got back on his feet. He made eye contact with Ari Whitefang for a few seconds, saw the older man's intense stare, then turned in the direction of the werewolf who launched at him like a projectile. The werewolf was massive, with golden fur that gleamed under the intense sunlight, with his stormy gray eyes trained on Aiden. He dug his paws into the ground, kicked up some dirt, and then surged forward at Aiden. Aiden drew in a deep breath and felt energy course through him as the werewolf sped toward him. His bones snapped and shifted, but it was painless. The world around him took on a golden hue, and his fingernails elongated into dark, frightening claws. He felt his teeth shift into fangs, and he saw the fur spreading across his skin. Ari Whitefang's eyes widened then, and he clenched his palm fiercely around the railing he'd been leaning on, pressing his lips tightly together in anticipation. He was doing it. He was doing it! The other werewolves had stopped their fighting and were now observing Aiden with the same expressions of anticipation, whispering amongst themselves. Is he actually? Aiden let out a fierce growl and then dropped on all fours, nearing the completion of his transformation. And then came the images of people wounded and on the brink of death, and him covered in their blood. As soon as the images flooded his mind, he was met with a bout of excruciating pain, one that snapped him out of his transformation instantly. It was unfortunate timing, too, since as soon as his transformation halted, the golden werewolf landed hard on him, pinning him to the ground with powerful paws. The wolf brought his mouth close to Aiden's face, fangs revealed like he was about to kill him, and then he spoke. "That's what I thought, puppy." "That's enough for today," Ari yelled, and the other werewolves started to head indoors, shaking their heads in disappointment as they went. The golden wolf didn't budge, though. He remained on top of Aiden, keeping him pinned to the ground. Ari stepped out of the shade and started to walk toward them. "Cole, you heard me. That's enough." "Whatever," the wolf growled. The wolf left Aiden alone and started to trot toward Ari, shifting out of wolf form as he walked. By the time he'd reached Ari's side, the wolf had transformed entirely into a tall, muscular boy with curly blonde hair, with strands falling down the front of his face. His eyes were the same stormy gray they'd been while he'd been a wolf. He was bare-chested and barefoot, the only items of clothing on him being his baggy pants. Ari Whitefang patted him on the back. "You did good today." "I do good every day," Cole Whitefang replied coolly, then looked in Aiden's direction and sneered at him. "Can't say that for everyone here, of course." "I'll take it from here," Ari said, narrowing his eyes at his son. "You should go freshen up and get something to eat." "All right, I'll see you later," Cole nodded. "Wait," Ari said. Cole paused and arched one eyebrow over the other, curious to hear what his father had to say. "Do you think he got close this time?" Cole shrugged. "I don't know. Isn't that as close as he's always gotten in 6 months? I don't know. I think there was something there this time. He looked really close." Ari murmured. "Yeah, whatever. I'll see you later." Cole headed off immediately, and Ari came to a stop over Aiden, offering him a hand to help him up. "I'm fine," Aiden growled, brushing Ari's hand out of his face and getting back up without any help. He brushed the dirt and grass off his clothes, then looked straight into Ari's eyes and felt a tinge of anger. "Stop looking at me like that." "Like how?" "You know how," Aiden growled. "And stop putting Cole on me in every training session. I told you already, I can't shift." "And do you know why you can't?" "I am not talking about this," Aiden hissed, and started to walk away, heading in the direction of the dormitories. "Where are you going?" Ari questioned. "Where does it look like I'm going?" Aiden responded, turning around to look at Ari. "Training's done, right? You've had your day's fill of watching me be humiliated in front of 100 werewolves. I think I can go take a shower in peace now?" "You think I get some enjoyment out of seeing you fail to shift?" Ari demanded. "Your son does. Wouldn't be surprising if you did too. Now, if it's all the same to you, I'd really like to go take a shower." "Sure," Ari nodded. "But when you're done with the shower, come find me at the south gate." "South gate?" Aiden frowned. "Why? Where are we going?" Ari snorted. "Come on, Aiden. You didn't really think that your training was done for the day, did you?" Aiden sighed. "Fine, but can you at least tell me where we're going?" "We're just going to see an old friend of mine," Ari answered. "Is it going to be safe?" Ari chuckled. "Probably not."
Full Moon Academy. The ebook format is now available on Amazon Kindle. Full Moon Academy in audiobook format is now available on Audible, Apple Music, and Spotify. Full Moon Academy in paperback and hardcover are available worldwide via Amazon.com. And in the Philippines, Full Moon Academy is available in all branches of National Bookstore, Expressions, and also at Shopee and Lazada.